So, shall we move on to the fourth question, which I'm going to put to Paul first. I hope that's okay, everybody. So, Paul, how do you think that the service providers should differentiate themselves from their competitors?
Okay, so I think we need to start with what the actual it's what Claire mentioned actually on the very first question. It's about comparing apples with apples, and I think one of the questions I get from our customers is that especially the service provider side, is that they're very keen that when they're completing a tender, that they're going to be judged on the same pricing they're putting up against someone else who's doing similar. And we're absolutely determined to ensure that as part of the procurement exercise, we are enabling that is clear. Where SFG 20 is part of the tender, you'll deliver this service to SFG 20, whether that's based on the criticality or the scope on a particular type of facility, that everyone is making efforts and judged on the same basis, rather than a discretionary view or a selective view, which we think is something that we can really help industry with. I'd be interested in other people's comments.
For me, then it comes back to the asset piece, doesn't it? So from when I was a contractor, trying to actually price SFG 20 against a poor asset list, or an asset list that's used unrecognisable definitions for the assets. How do you look at it and go, well, is that becomes very difficult. Water heater. Yeah, exactly. So that sort of uniformity within the industry is absolutely key, and the asset data and using a standard system that then relates to SFG 20 would make everything so much easier. And equally as a client as well, to be able to, you could do the work yourself up front. If you've got a good asset list, you've got SFG 20, you know how many hours it's going to take, you know roughly what an hourly rate for an engineer is. Before you even go out to tender, you should roughly know how much it's going to cost, if the system's working properly. And then you can see where the added value is coming from the tender process.
Yeah.
But that's very difficult.
I think it's funny, the question about the last 10 years. I think the next 10 years will be a real change. You know, and technology is at that turning point. We're seeing the SFG 20 integrations with various different software platforms. So one way or the other, the client's going to get that asset register, either by their own means or by a supplier that's kind of got that integrated data they then hand over at the point of tender or when they move on. So it'll be interesting to see the impact that will have in the future.
See, I think my background is bids. I don't sit in that role anymore, but that's where where I was born from in industry. And since I was 17, we've been bidding to SFG 20 when it was a book. And we always just sit there and share it around and take pieces from it. I say book and my Stokey tones, but it's always been a standard. I think the interesting thing is enforcing that standard, and that's the bit about the level playing field. So the more we can use the technology and the platforms we have to make sure that, 3401, which is AC, by the way, I am that sad, that everyone is using that same standard on that same piece of name convention, which means the same sort of, monthly, bi-monthly, whatever that might be. But at the moment, someone says they're to standard when they bid, but actually they might just be including the annual on a stat. And that's when you come down to the detail, that's the hard point, because that's where one price can be here to here, yet you're saying you're both hitting the standard, but one's just hitting stat and mandatory, the other one's doing all the different facets of. And that's the bit the procurement process currently doesn't allow for, in my opinion.
Yeah, but that's where it comes back to that sort of the old bill of quantities approach, an open book of actually showing exactly what you're pricing, which instead of it just being a straight bottom price and trying to then interpret what that is. So openness has got to be key to that process, and hopefully things like SFG 20 can do that and help us to do that, but that needs to be brought back into the industry.
But it comes back to the competency piece we talked about, the guys and girls producing this tender pack in the first place. If they don't quite understand what they're looking for, then how are you going to get it right from there? And that's where the contract variations hit you as you go on the journey with them. Oh, we found this. Oh, what about this over here? So that's where it can get a bit different. But let's assume that's in there. The apples to apples is there because we're pricing correctly off of the asset list versus SFG 20. the differentiators, what's going to make us different from, well, we already mentioned it earlier, we have two very different models, but we're both looking to achieve value for the client. And it also rolls down to what is the client looking for beyond the baseline. How does that model work for them? Do they want that depth? Do they want that self-delivery? What is it they want? And that's often not always teased out on the tender, because if Claire got a tender across and we were looking for this, and I got the same tender, I go, well, that just absolutely meets your requirements. Let's not, again, waste time and effort on us going for it. It might be the other way around.
It's actually, so we're an engineering company, right? I absolutely agree, we're an engineering company. However, a large percentage of my workforce now are call handlers. They are customer service representatives, they are invoicers, they are contract support administrators. And actually, the job has become more and more about getting a guy with a spanner to a boiler is pretty easy, right? But actually getting his paperwork, making sure his RAMs are checked up, making sure he can evidence them, making sure he can capture his time, that he's productive, that the client spoke to properly, that their KPI and SLA monthly report comes across, that that their objectives and what they want to see in innovation terms is fulfilled is a very different question. And what we tend to do is only spec the doing part, not the managing part. That tends to be almost forgotten in that procurement process. And it's very interesting that you pick that up, because you're right. The reason why we all end up bidding the same work is because this part, which is how we want to communicate, how we want our BAU to operate, isn't specified. The only thing that is specified is it's to SFG20, and then it's not particularly specified very well in most instances.
I think we've also created an industry of people who respond to, who are professional in responding to a bid. So what they're doing is answering an exam question.
Yes.
So you write an answer because the question is they want you to do something, so you tell them how you're going to do that. Going back to the point, the size of the FM market, service providers have all got their different nuances, and I think to go back to that point of differentiation, we want clients really should pick what bits they want, because the maintenance is the maintenance ultimately. We've answered the exam question, but really what do they want from that procurement process to learn culturally who's a good fit for them, not because it's the cost, and that's something that needs to probably change. And to look at the positives of procurement now, I'm seeing a definite swing towards that, certainly in the private sector of selection because of the fit. We need to see more of that going through. I think I don't think service providers have naturally got differentiation. We've got different models, we've got different solutions for different things. It's how we can project that through the bid process when we're answering questions that are very, very refined and
you've got 3 marks. I want you to demonstrate these 3 things.
These 3 things.
We can all demonstrate, how do you put a man to work? You can risk assess him. We're all going to talk about the same. The question, you're right, the correct questions aren't correct.
Aren't correct, yes.
They're not going to give you the answer that you're looking for.
And also,
you want problems at that stage, don't you? You almost want them to, within the question, to say, this is a problem that we're having. How would you find that solution? Because then that opens the door to much more nuances. As
that
you
goes
say,
back to David's question then they've got to have the knowledge base to be able to, when a service provider turns around and says, this is the way we'd approach that, they've got to have the knowledge base to go, well, that's the way I'd want you to work. That would fit with our organisation, which is what that cyclic approach in the industry has taken away, I think.
A question we often see, I think, in bids is how will you innovate? Which is just a
microfiber cloth.
And it is a classic FM bid question.
And the thing is, where are you in your innovation path? What have you already implemented? There's so many questions. I almost want to, you get the clarification questions. I'm like, this is all the ones I want to ask on the innovation section, because I don't know without knowing you whether these things are innovations for you or
whether they're relevant to your needs.
Yes. So I'm going to be a bit sneaky here, I'm afraid. So the next question, I'm going to offer 2 options. So I think one is just going to be for David, really, because that can be, what should facilities managers look for their service providers when tendering? But then we turn that on its head for everybody else and say...
Oh, David's on his own now.
Poor old David. I'm sorry, David. But the question is basically, what should FMs look for in their service providers when they're tendering? And then when you're happy with your answer, then we'll take that over to everyone else and say, what should they look for from their clients?
So I would say that you need to be looking for a contractor that obviously that's got depth of capability, that has integrity. That's really important. That can culturally align with you, and you can quickly tell whether somebody's going to actually be able to fit within your organisation. People is absolutely key, so how they care for their people, and how their people are supported within that organisation, and how they're going to integrate into your business as well. Obviously, value has to be there, of course, but the innovation piece is probably the most difficult part, because you can ask people to say, will you bring innovation? Yes, of course we'll bring innovation. But it's actually understanding what their capability is to even identify where the innovation is required in the first place. So being able to delve into that and actually understand the capability and depth of knowledge of the contractor that will bring that innovation into your environment, because every environment is different, or every client's got different needs, every site has got different needs, and you as a client need to understand where the areas that you need improvements are, and then find the contractor that can actually support you with those areas. And not every contractor will be able to.
No.
So you either want the innovation and work with the contractors to build it, or you accept, I'm just buying a service and it's going to be that. So and relationships has been a key part all the way through.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So shall we start with Harry for the alternative?
I mean, we've gone through some of the basics about kind of accuracy of data and a good level of understanding. I always find that works. But then again, I think the main thing I always look for is the relationship part is really important, but the openness in conversation. I've gone through procurement processes where the client didn't have that level of knowledge, but they knew they didn't, and they were okay in saying that they didn't. And they were okay in turning around, and actually we got to final stages and then were successful because we didn't fix the bid. We were actually, I suppose, confident enough to turn around and say, look, there's not enough information here to actually give you something that's really accurate. But what we will do is, match price on what you've done last year, and then work the next 12 months in figuring out exactly what it is that you need. And the client had the confidence and openness to turn around and say, actually, you know what, I really like that. So I think in terms of what suppliers are looking for from clients, if you know you can have an open dialogue at procurement stage, then you're pretty much on a good track to have a good client relationship throughout the life of the contract, I think.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
I think before this current role as a service provider, I was a client. So I think as a client as well, to understand the pressures that the client faces. So it's budgets, it's ESG, it's the people. I was looking at to be in a global role, and I have to say as well that the FM in the UK is leaps and bounds ahead of many other countries. No other country's got something like SFG 20, and I wanted to roll that out on a global basis because it's a great document to have and a great standard to have. But as a client, you're often got a way different set of criteria to work to than you probably as a service provider you'd realise. And that's probably what drives a lot of the procurement process. So when selecting, I think, absolutely, I guess it's part of the thing is, what are those pressures at that moment in time? Is it ESG? Is it budgets? Is it a shrinking estate, a growing estate? So there's so many different things that the client's got to think about in terms of who they're selecting. And at the back of it all is a procurement department sometimes saying, no, well, the outcome of the bid is this, but actually you want something else. And I always try and put myself in the shoes of the client as well, and to say really, what do they need? Some clients work on a basis of it's as simple as compliance. They want to stay compliant. Yeah. Others want to get on the net zero journey, for example, and move and get into social value. So it's really back to that issue we talked about earlier about what are the key drivers.
See, I have a strong belief that the reason why you get good service is because people care, right? So I think the difference between a good service provider and a bad service provider is one who cares. And I would say the same is a mirror effect when it comes to a client. So I don't care really what their drivers are in terms of what I care about is, do they care about it enough to want to change it and influence it and be part of it and go on that journey together? So what I'm looking for in a tender with an ideal client is, when you talk about what's passionate about your facilities is the fact that you're getting young girls to play rugby. You know, that's what you're passionate about, and that's why you care about your estates. What I'm looking for in my client set is, do you care? Do you care about your estates? Do you want to move it forward? Because that enables me to impact that. Where if it's just the second statement you said was, if you're just buying it for a service, tick, 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 then if I'm honest with you, at that point, I'm kind of out, because we might as well be any other. I can't add value there. We're never going to have trust. We're never going to go on a journey. There's never going to be any loyalty. So for me and for Lineker as an organisation, it's definitely, we care. We want to work with people who care about their estates.
Yeah.
That's generally the position.
We've got the best clients we've ever worked with are the ones that they've either got a problem, they've got something goes wrong, a side issue on a random Tuesday afternoon, or something happens from our side, something doesn't quite get delivered as expected. The client who turns around and says, how can we deal with this? Then you know you've got a relationship and you can work together and you're going to get over this. The minute it goes contractual is absolutely the worst, or we're going to treat you like a contractor, then you know you've lost them. So for us, we're looking for the we.
Why
guys and girls.
did this happen?
Yeah.
It's that question, isn't it? That's where it
And
goes.
what can we do about it?
Yeah. But if it's, why did it happen? How did you fail?
It's very different.
Instantly. It's all over. Yeah, the relationship never comes back after that.
So that's the kind of benchmark for us. And we've got some great examples of both. And you can end up flogging a dead horse as well. So that's our big thing of knowing when to go, this just isn't working, guys. And let's not mess about, let's just part ways.
I tell you what, though, that's something that's really interesting in industry, because you are now having suppliers who turn around and say, it's not for us. And I think that's a really great place to, because I'm with you. I think that I don't think it was just SMEs that have always just said yes to contracts. I think it's a little bit of a problem that we've all suffered with, where you go, we can do that. Where actually, no, just make sure that you can fulfil what you're saying, you care about it. Because the minute you don't care, it's done. It's done.
It's a good point you make as well. I think, thinking back, the most successful client relationships are those quite often in positions where they're part of like a workplace team, where generally speaking their priorities are the people within the buildings, right? You take the people out of them, and generally speaking there's not much for us to do unless you're talking about data centres, and it's a different story. But when they care about that side of it, and they understand that you do too, and there is an element, it's funny what we do, ultimately there's a part of it where we have to stay in the background. We're just making everything work to allow our clients to focus on their core businesses and allow people to go into a meeting room and the fan call's going to work, and and everything's going to operate as it should. But you need to be able to take some pride in that, and you need to be able to understand and care that actually you are servicing these other businesses and their core functions. Because if you're not, then you're probably in the wrong
wanting
industry.
to make each other look good.
Yeah.
That's the if you're at that pitch where it's always a witch hunt about whose fault it is, no one's ever going to look good. So it's kind of like, how can we make each other look good? And that's a conversation we have quite a lot with when we're solutioning clients, because like I said, we do an awful lot of, we don't really tender for things, we do a lot of relationship built sales. And that's because we're sitting down with clients who we're going to clients and saying, we can add value here. Can you listen to us? And we go and hunt for clients in that regard. And it's something that, therefore, we know before we sit in front of someone that we can add value. We understand their climate, we understand their environment. But I think it's really interesting that then it becomes something that we solution together. It isn't a tender where you're filling out criteria. It's actually, you have these set of problems, we have these set of fixes, and sometimes we don't have all the fixes and we have to develop one. And that's the most joyous thing. That's the innovation bit that people are missing. When you can actually go and create something, that's when that's when I sit at home thinking, I've done a good job today. That's a sweet spot. It's nice.
Yeah, I love your all those comments on innovation are entirely relevant as well, aren't they? Because again, it's how you measure them, how people explain them, because I'm sure everybody, or hopefully every company, can offer something slightly different and then just stand apart from everyone else. Say, look, but. So, moving on. We've already touched on this a little bit again, but it's fairly typical of these conversations, aren't they? Often the topics go round and round, don't they? Over the course of numerous years and perhaps have slightly different variations. But from this particular angle, I'd like to ask after the contract is awarded, we've said about the duration and stuff, how it can quickly go to the point you're retendering. You have about a sweet spot of a few months. But can we look at, or actually examine the question of how the actual building can remain compliant throughout the duration of the contract?
There's a lot of automation due there. I mean, you'll tell me how many regulation updates there's been, but I think there's near thousands of regulation updates to SFG 20 in a year. So that piece around engineering contracts has to be about automation and systems modernisation, because quite simply, if you put SFG 20 in today to a building and you have that specification for the next year, you won't meet a regulation. It's as simple as that. You need to be able to update the specification, you need to be able to change the way in which you maintain, which is why it's so important to back-end the systems into the standard. So for me, that compliance piece is about following the regulation, the changes in the standard to make sure that you're updating what is compliant. And actually, believe it or not, it's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult thing to do.
Is it for the contract? So when the contract's in place, for it to allow for those changes, because a lot of the time, I mean, we hear that a contract's awarded, and that's a point in time, and where we are updating, so legislation changes, that might mean there's a time implication, it might mean there's a criticality implication, there's things that have changed around law, which means that you have to do things differently in your building. But unless the contract allows for those renegotiation points, because if someone's got to do more work or potentially less work, how does that get introduced?
I don't think it allows. Most contracts that... I've been doing it too long. Most contracts that are wrote talk about keeping up with regulation and statutory changes. So that's a general term, just a one-off clause that you must always be up to date with standard regulation and legislation changes. So although no, it isn't something that's allowed for in change control mechanisms or risk profiling, what happens is you just have that one statement, and often as a contractor, or as a contractor, I'd like partner is a better phrase for me, you're beholden to a client who could actually turn around and say, the standard changed like this, when did you change your maintenance? Well, actually, there's a cost implication there may be a labour implication there, there's definitely a resourcing implication there might be subcontractor change that needs to happen. But actually, none of that is depicted in any procurement process I've ever seen. It's just that single term of your service must always be up to regulation and legislation.
And there's the other side to that as well, which is, does the client expect the partner to tell them what's happened? Because obviously, as a subject matter expert, the client may or may not know that these changes have happened. So we're the ones basically with that information, that control. So the onus is on us, service delivery, to actually impart that knowledge. And then that comes back to the trust and the relationships, which is what are the mechanisms and the processes to have these open conversations on this is why, and this is the result, and this is what it's going to look like. And of course, there will be financial implications, but ultimately everything else that goes on that journey as well. What does that mean for all of us? So, but it's going back to the nub of everything we talked about. It's about relationships, open communication, and the core processes that are behind it.
I think it's really different. So the biggest change I can think about that's had in the standard just recently is fire door. Fire door legislation after Grenfell changed massively. The certification required for fire door maintenance changed massively. Sitting down with your client and saying, the way in which we used to inspect your fire doors is no longer meets legislation, and actually now we need someone who's certified like this, and therefore the cost is going to do this. So that one little term that's in your contract, even when you do the information piece, it's then very much falls to the client to whether they want to make that change or not. It's part of their strategy, and that can cause contractual change problems all the time. And we've had clients in that bucket where actually then we're looking for ways to readjust the fire strategy, where we might be looking at what is actually a fire door needed for, even though you put fire doors throughout your property, which ones we're going to take as ingress and egress. So that's when the specialism part kicks in, of that knowledge base that you should be leaning off your contractor from. It's difficult.
It is, but also that pushes you more to start to actually risk assess your estate. So fire doors is a really good example where actually you can be compliant on a door that's only opened once a year to inspect it once a year. But if it's a high attrition door, you might need to inspect it every week, potentially, if it's going to be damaged. So, and then you risk assess across your assets and readjust your maintenance profile against it. And that's where the contractor should be able to come in and say, from our knowledge of your estate, when we've risk assessed it, yes, there is an impact because we now need to have a qualified engineer dedicated to that activity. However, if we approach it this way, the impact is only going to be this, as opposed to as if we just rigorously stay by the standard on every door, it's going to be that. So that's what, again, the relationship piece, trust piece, but also guiding the client through the approach that we can take and it's the ability for a client to accept risk, ability for the client to then work with you to minimise that risk, maybe adjusting the way they operate within the building in order to be able to reduce some of that cost. So there's lots of different approaches that can be taken, but as you said, you are the subject matter experts.
It's about us coming to you with options,
and
then you making that decision, but sometimes the contracts, they don't allow for that discussion process.
Yeah.
They just say, you've got to be up to regulation. Well, where does regulation apply? If we change the strategy around this, what's the... So it's about everything isn't apples for apples, is it? It's a fire door to a domestic property where the sleepers to a fire door in a non-domestic property is a totally different environment. And I just think, so it's the nuances that aren't equated for in that contract setup. And that's why, with the amount of regulations changes that go on, you have to have automation here to make sure that you can assess whether those changes are fundamental to your client. How many of those types of assets have they got? What type of locations are their buildings? There's so many areas to question.
There's a big question for me as well. Is always about whose responsibility is it? Because as well, when you're a building owner, when you're a client, you have your set of responsibilities. We as service providers have ours. So everything in my book is pretty simple. It should have an owner, but often it doesn't. And so be that it can, but to focus on other things, not just hard FM wise, you've got waste management, you've got ESOS regulations, you've got a raft of things coming in place, and who's the owner? And it's by working together with the client and saying, right, who owns that particular bit? We can all work together and advise, and we've got, Claire's sort of said, BISA, CIBC, all of these organisations have got data available and changes SFG 20 as well, so we can all get data from a source. It's where it's kept, how it's updated, and who owns it, and that's the key thing for me, because there are legal responsibilities as well, who owns it, and something you can't delegate sometimes.
Most of those have changed. With the Building Safety Act, there is a lot actually put back on the client from a starting point as that used to be passed off ownership to but actually a lot of those, in fact, I think all of them now sit with the building owner or the client to start off with. Don't get me wrong, that it's de-risked in some ways for the pass off, but it's...
I don't think it was ever really passed away from the client. Now I think we used to think it was.
I agree.
By contracting, we're passing that responsibility down. It never really went away from the client. In the eyes of the law, the client is ultimately responsible. Because the fact that we've chosen a contractor to carry out an activity does not take the responsibility away from us. And that comes back to where the knowledge of the client is absolutely key to understand the responsibility and the liability that we carry. And the fact that you can't disseminate that liability down, not really. Yes, we need your support to be able to understand how we mitigate that liability. But ultimately, it still sits with us.
But it's also, when legislation change comes in, how long do you have to novate to a new legislative change? There's lots of grey areas here. The same with competency. I mean, we talked about competency earlier. A gas engineer's got his gas safe, that's fine. But if you go to a pipe fitter, pipe fitting qualifications, guys. And there's lots of grey areas left. Although I agree we're much further on than most other countries are in terms of standard setting. There's still a lot of problems around competency.
Absolutely.
Just find a pipe fitter.
Or a steam boiler engineer.
I think another point as well is around reporting. I've worked in different and worked with different businesses that are self-delivery versus kind of supply chain models, and you know, the difference, and just even within those sectors, the difference in standard on the level of reporting is insane sometimes. And it's okay, you know, bidding a tender with SFG20 and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, but then actually coming down to proving it. You know, you go and service that boiler, and the report comes back and it says serviced as to SFG20 standards, or something along those lines from a supplier. It's you talk about, you know, you mentioned automation and integration with software systems now, and updating those reporting mechanisms as and when that occurs. And then making sure that any of those changes go right through down to the engineer on site with his phone in his hand, you know, filling and completing that out, because quite often it's just really not the case.
No, I think a boiler service, a large number, it's 21 checks on it. And actually, an unvented boiler versus a vented boiler it's all part of the same standard, but 2 tasks are either switched on or switched off.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance there for an engineer to know whether it's vented or unvented, without any software to drive the fact of, against this boiler, these are the checks that I should be doing, and it's 19 out of the 21, it's not the full 21. It's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, our engineers is something they actually complain about quite a lot, is how many times we force them to say they've done things.
Yep.
Yeah.
They've ticked this list off. But that's because proving compliance, evidencing compliance isn't just about PPM week 5 completed. That's where we were 20 years ago in the industry. It's now about, have you done all 21 checks that you should have done when this boiler went through its statutory 12-month? That's what, but a lot of systems without SFG 20 don't have that ability to give you that level of evidence.
I think that's the exciting thing now. We're actually seeing systems drive that behaviour. And you're absolutely right. It's something that wasn't there for a long time. From my background from military aviation, every single time we touched an aircraft, we had to sign it in accordance with all the way through. So it's ingrained. And then coming to the built environment after leaving the military, and you've got some pretty critical assets in there, and the paperwork is flimsy at best. To see that drive now, that actually I have confidence from a business ownership point of view, that when we're deploying engineers onto the ground and they're carrying out a service, they are carrying out in accordance with X, Y, and Z, and we can demonstrate it. And that's the piece that I think has been missing for a while, and therefore it hasn't driven the right behaviours in the past as well, which then comes down to everything we talked about the rest of the day, from procurement all the way through. Why are people changing it, right through to what are we tendering against, all comes down to that standard. And if we can demonstrate that standard in delivery, that removes half of the angst on when it comes to a relationship, it demonstrates our worth to clients, and then also allows us to do all the other good stuff around it, of hand-holding to all the extra special stuff. But just maintaining is just the basics, and we need to get that right first.
And I think the procurement question is, can you maintain it? Tick. But that is not the
Doesn't
question.
demonstrate anything.
The question is, how do you demonstrate that you can maintain it to the standard?
Yeah.
That's the question. And that's the interest, because everybody, no matter what system they employ, as long as they have an engineer with a spanner to the boiler who's got his gas safe, they can all say, can you maintain that asset? Tick, yes, I can. Can you evidence that you did all 21 checks and the guy's got a service pack and actually he's competent and he's had his right accreditation at the right time? That's a much more difficult question.
What my client hat on is to say, add into there, what do you do when it's non-compliant?
Yes.
Because you could be taking something that's business critical for a client out of action. Or you might not tell them. Engineers are very good at sometimes condemning a boiler and not telling anybody. And it's how we deal with that, because imagine the lift going down on match day at Allianz Stadium. Imagine that scenario. So all of that has to feed into it, because it's also about when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
We in the FM industry, that's what we do. We fix stuff when it breaks, and if it's broken during a compliance thing, the client needs to be told and an action plan in place really quickly to put it back into use.
I wonder how long it'll take for AI to be able to watch an engineer do the job and then record that it's all been done.
But the thing about the one thing we sit here all talking about, which is really interesting, we talk about the ability to report on it. Now, a question I end up getting from a lot of clients when we talk through our systems, because we're a data-led business. You know, each one of my SLT members have 12 key matrices. That's what we report on. I sit and have monthly meetings. We drill that data. That's what we do. But actually, the question I get asked at the end of all this is, how do you know he's done it when he's ticked the box? They don't.
No.
Because he's a human being at the end of the day. All you can do is make sure that you're treating the person right, you're training them well, and he's got the competency, and he's filled out all the paperwork you would have so he can assess the risk. But the answer is we're people businesses and stuff is going to go wrong.
Yeah, and that's where your relationship with your team,
Team,
is absolutely
team,
critical.
team.
Yeah,
team all the way.
yeah, we know our engineers individually as a client. I know all of my engineers.
Yeah.
You know, I know what's going on in their families. I know what's happening with them. So you know, even at that distance of being a client, where there's potential problems, and then you can work with the contract managers to say, actually, let's be careful here and let's support that person.
And that's, again, the procurement question will be, even if it goes that far, can you prove that you've done all the tasks? But the part where it's, how do you prevent human failure? That's the next question.
Yeah.
That's the next question. And then it's about how you treat your team, you know, how
Yeah.
invested they are, how engaged they are, whether they, I'm going to go back to, do they care? Because that's what it all comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah,
Do they care? Does the
absolutely.
account manager care? Does the engineer care? Does the client care? That's the piece.
Final question. So, earlier on, we started touching on things like AI and tech in general. So, having had conversations on tech for a number of years, I found it rapidly becomes the main subject of discussion. So that's why I didn't really want to go into it too early. But now it's probably highly relevant because the last question is what innovations would everyone like to see on the procurement process going forward?
This is a bid question, by the way. I've got to write it.
Have I been scored?
Crikey, go from your side first, perhaps. What do you want from us, from within tech?
I don't think it's more questions on a piece of paper I want more time. I want more exposure. Not from I don't want to take you out to dinner and wine and dine you. I want more time talking about what's important. I want more face to face. I want to, it's a two-way street after all. You know, I'd like to see that we could spend more time together working out whether the tender exercise should be, can you do the job? Yeah, I can do the job. What I'd really love to see in procurement, which is where we've got to on our vested type contracts, is sit down in a room for a good hour, talk about problems, be open, and talk about the systems we have in place or the people solutions we have in place that could add benefit. It's the listening and sharing part, definitely. And it's not about AI or tech. In fact, I don't want any more of that. I want connection.
I would. There is an ability for tech to provide some of that, though, in the fact that what we don't do as clients is we don't provide access to our technology, we don't provide access to our data in a usable way. And actually, if we could overcome some of the barriers that companies and organisations have to release their data and open up their networks, you know, so if the procurement process was, we want a service from you, here's access to our BMS, our metering, our CCTV, our fire system. I want you to go in and review it all and then come back and actually tell us what the service is required, as opposed to me trying to pull together a load of appendices of data, do it very poorly, and then as a result not quite get the right answer the first time round. Maybe technology and having an ability to be able to consolidate that into a procurement portal where it provides you access into that data, maybe that's where we need to be going. Because there's so much at the moment. It's our data. We can't share it. We can't let you onto our system. You know, security, etc. We've got to get past that and be able to trust people to be able to use the data appropriately and actually gain garner knowledge and use your expertise to be able to get the right solution.
I think that would be massively helpful. But I do think there was a piece of questionnaire that Bees did just recently around trying to understand retentions, which is I'm not going to go into retentions, but everybody sat in a room and said, yeah. We went out and asked for the data, and guess how many responses came back? It was almost astonishing. And that, you're right, there is a protective element to data, and I don't understand. It's a bit like when I'm in the British Gas and they ask me for my name, my postcode, because they think I'm going to run off with my own gas. It's a bit bizarre, you know. You've got to go through security measures. I think being more open generally into, not about commerciality, but being more open around data and being able to sit down in a session with you after we looked at your data and go, we've seen this in your data, why is that? Have you thought about doing this? Would make things a hell of a lot more productive, wouldn't it? And give us a much more knowledgeable starting point.
Yeah.
I think it can also come from the supplier side. We talked earlier about the level of data the suppliers are now able to kind of hold and monitor, and you mentioned, Claire, about being very much a data-led business. I think, a slight change in the procurement questions from how are you going to how have you, and can you evidence that with data, would actually give you a much better answer in the end. It's not about kind of pie in the sky, we're going to do this. It's actually, look, you can look at I mentioned training hours or first fixed rates or whatever that data set is. You can say, okay, well, we think we can solve your problem by X, Y, and Z, and the way we've done that in the past is by this, and here's the data to actually for you to review and to prove it.
A lot of people ask us how we win clients without going through competitive tender. We get asked that quite a lot as a business. And actually what you've just described is exactly what
Showing
we do.
value.
We go,
Yeah.
this is what we do, this is the benefit, this was the number of calls that we had, this is how we now do it, and this is the number of calls that we've got, and this is the value that we can create. And then you're not selling anymore.
Yeah,
All you're doing is saying, you have a problem and I can fix it.
Yeah.
And actually, you have another problem I can't fix, but I think we should do something like this. That is a much more healthy point of view.
Goes back to your point about complacency with a supplier. I've always made sure that, particularly on the quarterly meetings, there's always a slide about added value. Again, it's making sure, and as we advise our businesses to do the same, you make sure that you don't assume that they understand that, because it's very easy to forget. It's very easy to fall into those rhythms and those expectations. And so, bang on the door, shout about it, and if you can then evidence that through data and analytics, then that's even better.
It's facts, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's
And
facts.
AI will provide great ways to improve and go beyond BI reporting and make that data visible, which I think is a real skill set that is perhaps lacking, and AI can help with. It's okay having data sets, but then actually being able to make that visible and in a way that communicates your point very clearly and graphically to a client is possibly where some companies fall short.
Translation of data is really
Absolutely,
difficult.
yeah.
Providing
because it's just
meaningful
information.
data,
Yeah, it's
providing-
it's not even, it's just facts and figures
Yeah.
until you've translated it and trend analysis and give some meaning.
It's telling a story, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what we want to do.
Using data to
Tell a
create a
story.
narrative. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think digital AI has a very big part to play on that upfront information,
Yeah.
information gathering, that information sharing. I think when we come to procurement, what it isn't, we spoke about this offline earlier, it isn't having an AI tool to write your tender. That's the risk. Because I'm not preparing anyone that's doing that at the moment, but it's so easy to lose that personalisation about what you are. Answer those questions, but answer it with an element of you and what you as a business are doing. If you just AI it, it seems a really simple scenario and way of doing it, but it's a bit of a cheat. And I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are going to get away with it.
Vanilla, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
If we all AI it, we'll just, oh my word,
Yeah.
it'll just be a bunch of bananas.
Exactly.
Bananas. Vanilla.
So that's the risk. But I'm sure there's going to be certain methods and processes in place to prevent that happening in the future. But yeah, that's not what it is. Digital AI is not a cheat sheet to win a tender.
It's
Mark,
where-
sorry, Mark, I think you were...
No, I was going to say, from a tech point of view, I think, again, I go back to that phrase, what problem are you trying to fix? 'Cause there's lots of things and technology out there, but it's really about getting to the point where it means something different to you as a client. So asking for technology moves on, but to your point, Paul, things move so quickly. At the beginning of the contract, something in 2027, the tech is going to be very different. Now, is it affordable tech is a different question, but being open to business cases, that's I think they're going through that change process with the contract, but also understanding that things will change, and who knows what we can have in 3-4 years' time, what will be out there, because it is moving so quickly.
Yeah, very true. Paul, I think...
I think it's really looking at the things we've discussed today, where we started off with the challenge around understanding your asset base, understanding the maintenance required as part of the contract, understanding how can we use that technology to actually bring that together and actually help us, not do it for us, not like you just, not actually do all the work, but actually provide those assistants to simplify that and shorten that process of how can we take an asset register from any type of source and actually understand it. We all know assets are coded differently in every single system out there. There's no standards. Even I think even where industry is struggling at the moment, even the ISOs or the British standard, they're so focused on the soft landings approach. This is a new build, it's a new design, it's a building with a BIM model. Most of our buildings aren't, and we need to help the industry there by using that technology to give them the same opportunities that the best practice design build to operations gives us.
That's great, fantastic. Thank you ever so much. I think if everybody's happy, we'll finish off there. Some fantastic comments. Thank you so much for those. Certainly on the aspects of openness, honesty, clarity, relationships in general, the positive elements of that, the proper use of data as well. I think is probably one of the most important things that everybody has to focus on, certainly in the future. Now it is everywhere, isn't it? Everybody has to get their head around getting the correct data and using it properly, rather than just collecting data. We've seen this for years now. Now it's moved on, hopefully, and is moving on to the point where everybody is actually using data in the proper way. So from that aspect, I think I'd like to thank everybody for their time and their wonderful comments today. And thank you to SFG20 for allowing us to all get together and have an excellent discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.